I'm gonna open up YouTube. Oh, got a notification here. All right, and that's nothing to do with us. All right, so that's good. I'm gonna go here, do a search for Theology Central. All right, I'm gonna click on this. Test 1, 2, 3. Oh, got a notification here. We sound okay there. I'm going to turn off the live chat. Then I'm going to go back here. I'm going to jump over to sermon audio. All right. We sound okay there. Sound okay there. All right. There is a wedding currently underway. So they've been on the air for 32 minutes, so you can go watch a wedding, or you can sit here and listen to me struggle through what's about to occur, all right? And so maybe the struggle will be the entertainment, all right? Maybe I can be entertaining, all right? I don't know, okay? All right, here we go. Friday at 5:30. I doubt anybody's tuning in, so that's okay, all right? Oh, no, well, I should have known. North Carolina, always there. Thank you so very much, North Carolina. I greatly appreciate it. I can always count on North Carolina. When I think, oh, nobody's going to be listening, there's North Carolina. So thank you so very much. I do appreciate that. It is very encouraging to know, hey, if I go live, at least somebody in North Carolina is going to tune in. And if I go live after midnight, someone from Canada is going to tune in. All right? But that's good. Oh, I hope I can do this. I hope I can. All right. Oh, I know what I need to open really quick. Hang on. I need to open up the Church One app. I need to go to sermons, go to series, not year, go to series. Here it is. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, oh boy. Let's try this. Oh man. Okay, without any further delay, oh boy. We go live in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Looking at our world from a theological perspective, this is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
All right, place your bets. Place your bets right now. All right, you can place your bet that this is going to be a decent episode. It's going to be enlightening. It's going to be in depth. It's going to be good teaching. You're going to learn something. It's going to be beneficial. Or place your bet that this is going to be another disaster and an ongoing string of disasters. What do you think? Is this going to be a disaster, or is this going to be a really good episode? What do you think? Place your bets now. You have the chance to win. Well, absolutely nothing other than you can say, I knew it. I called it. I was right. So place your bets, and we'll talk about everything going on right after I say, good afternoon, everyone. It is Friday, January the 9th, 2026. It is currently 5:31 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the Theology Central studio located right here in Abilene, Texas. It all started innocently enough. I'm going to say it was innocent enough, right? I'm just sitting here in the studio. I don't know what to record about. I don't know what to do. I'm trying to figure out, hey, do I do this? Do I do that? So what do? I grab the Sermon Audio app, as I always do, and I just start looking and looking and looking, and I see a sermon that they use Ruth chapter 2 as their text. And I look at the title, I look at Ruth chapter 2, and I'm like, wait, what? I just, hey, let's turn on the microphone and do a sermon review. That's innocent enough. What could possibly go wrong other than maybe the sermon is a total train wreck? And in some ways, the sermon was a total train wreck, right? Because by the time it was over, all I could say is Ruth 2 says, what? What are you even talking about? Because it turned a house mentioned in Ruth chapter 2 basically into the church. It was just, I don't even know what was happening. So we addressed it. But then I said, because I always try to be fair, I always try to be in depth, I'm like, well, if you go to the book of Ruth and you look at chapter 1, there is a lot going on in that text. names like Bethlehem means house of bread, but yet there's a famine in the land. Judah, the land of promise and covenant. There's a famine. Wait, what's going on? Elimelech, his name means my God is king. Wait, Naomi, her name means sweet or pleasant. They have 2 children. That means like weak, wasting away, dead. Wait, what is happening? Everything seems to mean this or that. It's like it's creating this, it's kind of creating that, I ultimately described it, hermeneutically speaking, as a narrative theology, right? Narrative theology. So I thought, you know what? I did the review. Now it would be great to go to Ruth chapter 1 and just show everyone how narrative theology works, that it's an actual historical narrative with actual real people and real places, but there is a theological narrative right there along with the historical one. I thought I did a great job on that. I was happy. I was like, yes. And then I made a ridiculous statement. I said something at the end. Well, do we go on to Ruth chapter 2? Do we go to Ruth chapter 2? Now, to be fair, part of me thought, whoa, what I did with Ruth chapter 1, everyone, I'm going to get all kinds of emails going, man, go to Ruth chapter 2. That was really good. That was interesting. That was fascinating. Yeah, go on. I didn't really get any emails, so that kind of made me think, well, maybe I should stop. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. When we get to Ruth chapter 2, we are introduced to this. Ruth chapter 2, verse 1, and Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And I'm like, oh, let's talk about the Boaz problem. Now, see, at this point, I'm not thinking, well, wait a minute. If I do go to Ruth chapter 2, I'm kind of messing everything up because I'm kind of just doing a standalone episode about Boaz. But if I do that, I'm kind of already entering chapter 2. But I didn't even care. I'm like, here's just another episode. It's simple. Let's talk about the Boaz problem. And the Boaz problem is that Christians all say Boaz is basically Jesus because Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. It's really the kinsman redeemer problem more than a Boaz problem. So we talked about, wait a minute, ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't work. Jesus cannot be my kinsman redeemer because I'm not his kinsman. By nature, I am a child of the devil. I'm outside of the covenant. I'm by nature a child of wrath. I am his enemy. Now, once he saves me, he gives me the power, the authority to become a son of God. He adopts me as a child of God. I'm a child of God by adoption. He does not redeem someone he is kin to, a relative. He's adopting an enemy, a stranger, a child of the devil, someone who's in the kingdom of darkness, and he brings them over to the kingdom of light. So he cannot be my kinsman redeemer. The whole thing falls apart theologically. So then I was like, okay, well, let's put this together. So then we went back to Ruth chapter 1, and then we found now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. I'm like, okay, this sets up the entire time frame. What's going on in the time of Judges? It's about Israel. Israel constantly is violating and breaking the covenant, right? Things are going good for them. Ultimately, they fall into kind of apathy. They start falling into sin. They start falling into idolatry. They get put under some kind of judgment. They fall under being controlled by some pagan nation. They suffer. They finally cry out to God. God delivers them. Then they get blessed. Then they go back to sin. It's this cycle over and over and over again. I'm like, well, when you open up the book of Ruth, it's the time of Judges. That's why there's a famine in the land of Judah, because what happens when they're not faithful to the covenant? Well, they get the curses of Deuteronomy 28 through 30. So this story in Ruth is really kind of a story about Israel, and it's a story of Naomi, but Naomi she is an Israelite living out what is happening to Israel as a nation. What's happening to Israel as a nation? They are suffering under the consequences of not following the covenant. They are being punished for that. So if anyone gets a kinsman redeemer, it's Israel, right? And so we went all the way to the New Testament, showing how in the New Testament, Jesus came to save his people from their sins. He came to be the redeemer of Israel. And the kinsman redeemer, that same Hebrew word for kinsman is used about God redeeming Israel over and over and over and over and over. God is the kinsman redeemer of Israel. He will redeem them, save them, regather them, give them the land, fulfill all of the covenant promises. So we have to understand it more in that light, not about us. So I thought we did a really good job talking about all of that. I did a great. So then I was like, okay, well now let's start chapter 2. Well, then when I start chapter 2, I'm like, well, wait a minute. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? So then I'm like, okay, and Naomi. So I'm like, okay, do we do an episode about Naomi? Had a kinsman. Do we do an episode about a kinsman? I did all of that, but then everything started sounding very repetitive, as if I already covered all of this, which I had. In some ways, I don't feel bad about being repetitive because it was necessary, because we were approaching it in such a radically different way. We're looking at this as being about Israel more than it is than making it about us where it doesn't fit theologically. So at that point, I'm like, what am I doing here? So am I doing chapter 2? So then it's like, this wasn't even supposed to be a series. Now it's a series. It's all fallen apart. So then it's just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. So we took a little detour. We've been talking about annihilationism. I think I've been doing a decent job with that. We got a lot of work to do there. We need to get to our systematic theology. We can't leave that series alone. And I got other things I need to work on. But I'm like, well, I got to at least finish chapter 2, don't I? So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go back to Ruth chapter 2, and we're just going to work on verses 2 and 3. Verses 2 and 3, because we've kind of already covered verse 1 by looking at the kinsman by itself and Naomi by herself. But let's put it all together. Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. I know that's a 9-minute review, but that I feel there's a part of me, if I would have been able to do this like the very next day, I probably wouldn't have gone into such a long review. But since I think it's been over, the last episode. Yeah, it's been 3 days. I think it's been 3 days. Then I was like, I got to put this all back in order somehow. So, are you ready? I don't know. I'm not even ready. I feel conflicted. Like, what do I do? How do I even make this work? All I can do is say, look, it's kind of like you started it, you got to finish it, right? It's almost like an obligation. I have no choice. I guess, I see, that's kind of the weird thing. In some ways, I do have a choice. I don't have to do another thing about it. And then see how many people email me and say, are you going to finish that? Most likely, if I do, I'll get 1 email, maybe 2 at the very most. And most other people don't really care. They just look to see what the next episode is. They don't always care if I'm following a certain line of reasoning or logic or a series no, they just like, what's next kind of thing. But here we are. I feel like I have no choice. Are you ready? Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. And Naomi. All right? And Naomi. I want to make it very clear that when we open up chapter 2, Naomi, she's still in the same condition that she is. If you look at the end of chapter 1, remember she says, no longer call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. She's in a bad situation. She is bitter. She is empty. There's been death. It's been a bad situation. And again, that fits perfectly the narrative for Israel themselves, right? They may have went out full, but they're coming back empty in a sense, right? They are just in a bad situation. We could talk all about that, all right? But Ruth chapter 2, verse 1 says, and Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. Now, it doesn't fix anything, but it tells us that, hey, there is a solution that could exist, all right? Now, the story is not going to just move along from a theoretical standpoint. They're going to move forward from the reality of this situation to this. So what do we know? Naomi's in a bad place, bad situation, bitter, empty, not good, vulnerable, possibly even desperate, nobody to provide. Sons are dead, no husbands. Things are not good, right? Things are not good. And so that we hear about the kinsman. Now, it is a glimmer of hope because this kinsman is a mighty man, seeming to have power, position, prestige, of wealth, meaning has the ability to provide, and of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. So there is a relative that seems to have the means, the position, the power to possibly do something. Doesn't mean how they're going to do it, but it definitely demonstrates that they have the ability to do so. All right? Now, in Ruth chapter 2, it stops talking about, and a roundabout way, Ruth chapter 2 from a hermeneutical standpoint is not like chapter 1. You got to notice the difference, right? Chapter 1, every word seems to have has a deeper meaning. Bethlehem, house of bread, Elimelech, my God is king, Naomi, pleasant, sweet, and then even in chapter 1, by the end of chapter 1, she changes her name to Mara, to bitter. Everything seems to have this extra layer of meaning, all right? But in chapter 2, it doesn't seem to be doing that. It just tries to show us what life is actually looking like for these two, we'll call them two widows, and they're at the bottom of Israel's social and economic world. I mean, they're in a bad place. They're in Israel, who's going through some difficult times. Clearly, it's the time of Judges. You can read about how difficult it is. They're vulnerable, they're hopeless, they're helpless. They're at the bottom of the social standing. That's where the story now becomes less about this means this or this and brings us into the reality of the situation. Right? There doesn't appear to be any speeches. There's not any miracles. There's no revelation. It's just, how are these women going to survive? All right? So I'm going to read verses 2 and 3, and then we're going to try to take this apart. All right? So there's Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. We've talked about that now 50 times. Verse 2, and Ruth, the Moabitess, the text makes sure it reminds us, hey, Ruth is from is a Moabitess. She's from Moab, right? Said unto Naomi, let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap, this is the King James, and her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. Now, I'm going to read it from a different translation. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Now, let me read it from one other translation. One more. Let me read it one more, right? I just want us to clearly hear how the language is being used here. There's the book of Judges, and then there is Ruth. Go to chapter 2, verse 1. It reads like this, if I can find it. There's chapter 2. Now, Ruth chapter 2, verse 2. One day, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go out into the harvest field to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it. Now, I like that because that really captures, hey, let me go see if I can find anyone out there who'll be kind enough to let me go and basically pick up the leftovers, right? Because, and that's got to show you where they are. Let me go pick through the leftovers. I mean, we don't have any other prospects right now. We got to go do this. All right, verse 3. Naomi replied, all right, my daughter, go ahead. So Ruth went out and gathered grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. Right? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. All right? So now let's take these two verses apart and see what we can see there. I'm going to try to be hermeneutically sound, and hopefully we'll find some important lessons here. Are you ready? Okay. There, you've got the verse, you've got the setup, you've got the setting. You know, I think I've done everything I can possibly do. Let's go through these verses. All right. Let me go and glean, right? That's the very first words. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, let me now go to the field and glean. Let me go to the field and glean. Now, notice who speaks first here. It's not Naomi, it's Ruth. Naomi does not seem to have a plan. She doesn't seem to be strategizing. Naomi is not sending Ruth. Ruth takes the initiative. Now, is there any significance to that? Maybe because they're out of options. Maybe Ruth is sitting there going, look, we got to come up with something, right? We need options here. Now, if you think about it, gleaning is not necessarily a job. It's not employment. It's definitely not a career path, okay? Think of it this way. It's the very bare minimum for the desperately poor to survive. This is like, hey, they're gleaning, you're just going to go, or they're harvesting and you're just taking over the leftovers. Whatever is left, whatever they missed. I mean, this is like, it's pretty bad. It's kind of, I know this is not a perfect example, so please, I'm trying to give us some kind of an emotional feel. It's like two people sitting there, they're out of options, and one's like, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go over to the fast food restaurant and I'm going to go through the trash because maybe there's some leftovers there that they threw in the trash that we could have. Now, I know that's a grosser analogy, but you're looking for the leftovers. You're looking for what was missed kind of thing. I know that's not a perfect illustration, but you get the basic idea. Now, why is she doing this? Well, the law of Moses had commanded Israel not to harvest everything. If you go to Leviticus, I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this in I'll read it in the translation I just happen to have in my hand. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 10. All right? Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 10. When you harvest the crops of your land, do not harvest the grain along the edges of your fields, and do not pick what the harvesters drop. It is the same with your grape crop. Do not strip every last bunch of grapes from the vines, and do not pick up the grapes that fall to the ground. Leave them for the poor and the foreigners living among you. I am the Lord your God. And then we could go on. Do not steal, do not deceive, do not cheat anyone. We get the idea. Now, this is law. The law is, hey, no, don't take everything. And if you drop something, you leave it. And you leave it not just for the people, you leave it for the strangers in the land, the foreigners in the land. You leave it for them. This is the law offering a provision, an element of grace, a means of survival to some level, right? And that's kind of interesting. I was thinking about it theologically. Typically, the law condemns, the law reveals. In this particular case, the law is providing at least something. Now, it's not an ultimate solution, right? You can't just count on this to survive, but this is to offer a little bit of help. Now, this is where you could go into all kinds of theological pictures and applications, and I'm going to be careful with that. I'm not going to do that right now. I may work on something, but we want to be very careful and stay to the text. So this is the law of Moses being, Ruth is taking advantage of this. She knows this. Now, again, the text does focus on the fact that she's a Moabitess. It does. But remember, she's basically become a Jew, become a part of Israel. I'll go where you go. Your God will be my God. She's become a part of this. And she's now acting within this system. Now, we could say a lot about this system. We could say a lot about it, right? Yeah. How do we understand? A lot of people who want kind of a Christian nationalistic view also doesn't really care about the foreigners or the strangers in the land. So there's a lot we could get into, but just know this is there to allow people to be able to try to survive. Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23, and I believe verse 22. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 22, if I can find it. Leviticus 23, is it verse 22? Yeah, the festival of harvest. When you harvest the crops, this is Leviticus 23:22. When you harvest the crops of your land, do not harvest the grain along the edges of your field, and do not pick up what the harvesters drop. Leave it for the poor and the foreigners living among you. I am the Lord your God. Do this because I am the Lord your God. Leave this. I mean, that's a beautiful picture of mercy, of grace, right? There's a lot going on there. Okay, how about Deuteronomy? I think Deuteronomy 24. Deuteronomy 24, verses 19 through 22. Deuteronomy 24, starting in verse 19. Deuteronomy 24, starting in verse 19. When you're harvesting your crops and forget to bring in a bundle of grain from your field, don't go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, for the orphan, for the widow. Then the Lord your God will bless you in all you do. When you beat the olives from your olive trees, don't go over the boughs twice. Leave the remaining olives for the foreigner, for the orphan, for the widow. When you gather the grapes in your vineyard, don't glean the vines. After they are picked, leave the remaining grapes for the foreigner, for the orphan, for the widow. Remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. That's why I am giving you this command. You used to be a foreigner. You used to be in a land that wasn't your own. Take care of these people. Show compassion and understanding but you can say, but it's my property. It's all mine. And it says, no. Leave it. If you just forget something, don't go back and get it. Just leave it. A very interesting law. A lot we could talk about there, right? There's a lot we could say here. But there you have it. Now, why is God setting this up? I think because God assumes that there's always going to be those who are poor. There's always going to be the widow. There's always going to be the orphan. And there's always going to be the foreigner. They're always going to be that. There's always going to be those. So he sets up a system to try to take care of them to some level. Gleaning here, you're just going in to pick up what's been left. This is an act of mercy. I don't think there's any other way to get around it. Right? And mercy is something you can't really demand, right? So that's why Ruth says, let me go and glean after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. So this means, this is not like she's going to demand something. She's going hoping that she can find favor in someone who will let her do this. Now, the law says to do it, right? But does everyone follow the law? Well, we know Israel doesn't always follow the law. That's why they're constantly under covenantal curse, like there's a famine in the land, right? So I'm going to, again, go back to Ruth. I'm going to read that part again so that you see that she's in a humble kind of position the way she says this. Verse 2. Verse 2. One day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go out into the harvest field to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it. Hey, she's not real. In this case, that translation, she's not even saying the law demands that they have to do it. She's just like, I'm hoping I can find someone kind enough to do this, because someone has to be kind enough to follow this. Because there would be people be like, no, I don't care. You foreigner, you widow, you poor. Go get a job. Leave us alone. This is my field. I plowed the field. I planted the seed. I took care of the crop. I'm harvesting the crop. You don't get any of it. It's all mine. So I like the fact that she's like, if I can find someone kind enough to let me do it. So she's not demanding it. I think that's kind of interesting. All right. Now, there is kind of there is a little bit of implied maybe danger and humiliation of this moment, because look how the text describes it. The text says, one day Ruth the Moabitess, depending on the translation, it emphasizes that she is a Moabitess, right? Even though she may have renounced everything and, in a sense, following and becoming kind of a Jew in a roundabout way, she's still a Moabitess. So she's a widow. That puts her in a pretty vulnerable situation. She's got no man to protect her, quote unquote. Of course, in that culture, that would be very important. No son. She's got nothing. She's a foreigner. That's probably good. At times probably puts her at odds with the people there. Why are these stinking foreigners coming to our field, taking all of our... No, they can go somewhere else. Tell them to go somewhere, build a wall around the field, right? Whatever the case may be. You know that there's some of that mindset. She's a Moabitess. Okay, that's not going to put... If they know that, that's not going to make her very popular. She's alone. And she's economically desperate. And when you're economically desperate, you can be taken advantage of. So in some ways, she's not walking into an environment that's necessarily safe. She's walking, I think it would be fair to say, into a male-dominated work site, and she's a female. So she's an outsider. So she's vulnerable being a female in a male-dominated workplace. And so everything about this is not a possibly good situation. And she's just kind of hoping that someone doesn't chase her away. Hey, get out of here. Get out of here, you Moabitess. Get out. We don't want you around here. I mean, that's very possible. So in a sense, this is not a Hallmark scene. This is kind of a risky scene. And Naomi's response, if you kind of look at her response, she just says, if you look at it, Naomi replied, all right, my daughter, go ahead. Just go ahead, my daughter. Like, there's no blessing. There's no instruction. There's no plan. It almost sounds like, all right, go ahead. We don't have any other options. Go. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Don't know what else to do. It's not even she can say, well, we should think this through. Maybe we could reconsider. No. She's like, go, just go. Right? Then Ruth chapter 2, verse 3. All right, Ruth chapter 2, verse 3, she says, the text says, so Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz. So she sets out and she goes and gleans in the field after the reapers. There's no drama, there's no music, there's no narration. It's just, she starts working. She starts gathering whatever she can find that's left behind. And then, I don't know if she's gone to one field, but whatever that, she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. Now, from Ruth's perspective, it's an accident. From us, the reader's perspective, the narrator already told us who Boaz is, right? From the storytelling perspective, from a narrating perspective, we already know Boaz. We know, and we're like, oh, she happened to be in that field. Good, right? But from Ruth's perspective, she doesn't know this. She just knows she's in a field. And I think from a biblical perspective, this is kind of I'm not going to say, is it a common thing in biblical storytelling? We have in Genesis 24, Rebecca happens to come to the well. 1 Samuel 9, Saul just happens to go looking for donkeys. And I think this is important. Ruth just happens to be here. And remember, this is so critical, right? This is so critical. What's the bigger problem in the narrative of Ruth? Israel has no king in the land. How are they going to fix this ultimate problem? Well, it's going to be Boaz, Ruth, Obed, Jesse, David. Remember, the book ends with mentioning David. The no king solution is going to be fixed. And through David comes the King of Kings, which then will become the kinsman redeemer to come to redeem Israel, right? So, I mean, the bigger picture is going to be fixed. So, but from a human perspective, she just happens onto this. So let's just put this thought down, right? Put it on your refrigerator, and you can talk about it this weekend. God advances enormous purposes through completely ordinary decisions. God advances enormous purposes through completely ordinary decisions, through completely ordinary means. If you don't like ordinary decisions, but in this case, it's an ordinary decision. I'm going out today and I'm going to glean. I'm going to see what's left over. And I'm going to choose this field. And it just happens to be the one that, belongs to Boaz. It's an ordinary decision, but God is going to advance an enormous purpose, which is to ultimately bring about David, which will bring about the King of Kings. You get the idea, right? Now that's difficult to wrap our mind around, right? Because I can struggle with this philosophically. Well, if God can advance an enormous purpose through the most ordinary means, then why not start using those ordinary means to move about enormous purposes that could stop pain, suffering, death? Okay, we could go on and on and on. But if God works that way, then that means we, in many cases, have no clue. One, in many cases, we may not know what the enormous purpose is. And two, whatever God is doing is going to look completely and totally ordinary. It's not going to be extraordinary. It's going to be ordinary. We love the extraordinary, right? I mean, charismatics, all their stories, they love the extraordinary. God spoke. There was a vision. I fell on the floor. I couldn't get up for 16 hours. God, I felt the presence of God. This happened. And I felt a voice telling me to stop. They love those dramatic stories, right? Christians love that stuff, okay? Even if later on the stories are found to be completely fraudulent, we don't care. We never give up loving that. But what if, time after time after time, God moves or God advances an enormous purpose through the most ordinary decision or ordinary means? We talked about this in our study of Isaiah 40 through 55. Here is Judah in Babylonian captivity. Israel's been destroyed. The temple's been destroyed. They've been in captivity. They're going to be there for 70 years. And they're looking for, how is God going to deliver us? Where is God? Now, they have biblical history to know, God delivered us from Egypt in the most extraordinary way. Plagues, the parting of the Red Sea. But now when it comes to this situation, God doesn't part the Red Sea. He doesn't split the heavens open. He doesn't send plagues. He sends them a pagan ruler by the name of Cyrus. And Cyrus is like, all right, you can go back and I'm going to give you provisions and things you need and go build your temple and go build your city. Very ordinary. So ordinary, you may not even think God's involved. It's very difficult because what we have a tendency to do is if the situation works right, goes in our favor, like, boom, God is working in an ordinary way to do extraordinary things. But if everything goes horribly wrong, do we see God working in ordinary ways to advance whatever? It can be difficult. It's hard to see God in the ordinary. When you make a decision to do this or to do that, and then next thing you know, something happens, and you're like, whoa, well, was it God directing the ordinary thing? And if God is directing the ordinary thing to extraordinary outcomes, then could he not then direct me in my life to avoid all the horrible outcomes? I mean, it's always difficult in how to process that. And just note, in Ruth 2, it does not say God led Ruth. He directed her. He spoke to her. He put his hand, and pulled her shoulder. There's nothing God doing anything here. It just says she happened to go there. That she just happened to go there. Just happened to be there. She just happened to do this. Or you just happened to do that. Or you just happened to do this. You just happened to do it. And I think it's interesting. Look what the text doesn't do, right? The text, or the narrator in the text, doesn't say, this is a miracle. Doesn't do that. Doesn't even explain God's plan. Now, if I read the end of the book, I'm like, oh, chapter 4, Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David. Okay, I see what God is doing, right? But it just happens through the most ordinary means. She just happened to come to that field. The narrator does not interpret the moment for us. It doesn't even tell us what it means. It just shows here's a hungry woman in a field picking up leftovers. So all we can do is observe that. Do I want to make it sound like more? Yeah, in some ways I do. How does this work? But it does demonstrate, I think, biblically that sometimes God works in the most ordinary means, and that's hard for us to see. It's hard for me to understand. If God can, doesn't it raise questions for you? If God can intervene, part the Red Sea, open up the earth, send in snakes, all the things he can do, raise the dead, calm the storm, walk on water, get rid of demons. Heal the sick, heal the blind, all the miracles and miraculous things that happen. Fire comes down from all the things that we see in the Bible. If he can do the extraordinary, then why does he not intervene in the ordinary and an extraordinary way? But in many cases, he doesn't do anything extraordinary. He just allows things to play out in an ordinary way. And it can be confounding because the ordinary way sometimes is filled with pain, confusion, waiting, suffering. Well, God, you can intervene in an extraordinary way, but even in an ordinary way, he can still be advancing enormous purposes. See, and I think this is important. If we put ourselves in this scene and these verses, if we were standing in the field that day, you would not say, "Oh, redemption is happening. Here it goes. We're going to get that king. We're going to get the king, and that king is going to God's going to make a covenant with that king, and that king is going to ultimately lead to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who will come to redeem his people Israel. He's going to save his people from their sin." You would have just saw, here's a woman in the field, a stranger. You could have even been very prejudiced and bigoted. "Hey, you Moabites, get out of here. We don't want you here. Leave our stuff alone." Right, but you just saw a poor, needy woman. No idea that poor, needy woman is going to end up with Boaz, who's ultimately going to bring about the Davidic line, which will ultimately she's going to ultimately show up in the lineage that leads to Christ. You would have just said, "Hey, there's a poor woman trying not to starve." But yet, in this, what's happening here, we have the future of David. We have the future of kingship. We have the future of the covenant Davidic line. And it's all moving forward just because a woman happened to go out looking for scraps. God is not being dramatic. He's just being faithful, but faithful to his covenant. Remember, we want to turn this into spiritual pictures about us, but it may apply to us in a sense that God works in an ordinary way. If you think about Joseph and Mary, on one hand, that looked very ordinary from a human perspective. Obviously, something extraordinary is happening. A virgin conceived and brought forth a son, right? That's extraordinary. But you'd have just saw two people traveling to pay their taxes, and next thing you know, it's time for her to deliver, and there's no room for her in the inn, kind of thing. Now, if we go back to Naomi, because we kind of almost lose sight of her for a second, she's not in the field. She's at home. She's still bitter. She's still empty. I don't even know if she's waiting. She may have given up hope. And while she's sitting there, the answer to her problem is already in motion and she doesn't even know it. And everything's under Israel It's the time of the judges. Things are not good. There's no king. Everyone's doing what is right in their own eyes, but something is unfolding and nobody realizes it. I think that's providence kind of works that way. You don't notice it. You don't see it. You don't understand it. Maybe bitter and fed up with it. In a sense, Ruth, then, is not a story about God dropping answers from the sky. He's not announcing his plan with thunder and lightning, okay, and signs and wonders. It's about God preserving a future for his covenant people through the ordinary. The only way I know how to describe it, through the ordinary. God doesn't even announce himself in this. He doesn't. I mean, you don't even really see God in this, right? Isn't it kind of interesting that God, we're not saying God is not there, but the story just gives us the ordinary, not the supernatural or the divine. Ruth chapter 2, Naomi is bitter and she's empty. And it moves from bitter and empty to, gleaning, picking up scraps. It goes from emptiness to gathering scraps. It goes from bitterness to, I'm going to go hope someone will be nice to me. So in a roundabout way, God begins to move them towards a king and ultimate redemption, which comes in Christ, not with a speech, not with a miracle, but simply by a woman going into a field because she's hungry. And that leaves us, so now I'm going to read them all together. Ruth chapter 2, verse 1, now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband Elimelech. I'm reading it from a different translation. One day, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go out in the harvest field to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it. Naomi replied, all right, my daughter, go ahead. So Ruth went out to harvest grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. So maybe the story here is just the ordinary way in which the story plays out. All right. I don't know what else to say. There's a lot of things I could throw in, but I'm just going to leave it right there because I don't want to say more than the text says. It does raise some questions in my mind about law. It does bring up some theological questions about law and gospel, but I won't do that right now. And the next time we'll start in verse 4, and maybe we'll break it down from 4 to 9, maybe. I don't know. There you go. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Friday evening, a wonderful weekend, and just think that whatever you're doing today, that seems ordinary, God could be advancing extraordinary purposes, but he does so through the means of the ordinary. And it raises so many questions, but it's always something to consider. Thanks for listening. Everyone have a great evening. God bless.